The capital's main enemy has no face. It is not a deficit of education, not a lack of market opportunities, and not even a shortage of money supply in accounts. This entity is far more insidious, stalking the object 24 hours a day. It has penetrated every pocket, every screen, and, most dangerously, the neural pathways of the brain. The name of this entity is consumerism. But this concept requires redefinition. Consumerism is not merely the act of purchasing goods. It is complex social engineering that has turned humans into the biological equivalent of a rodent in a closed cycle. The subject runs in a wheel, generating energy, expending vital resources, yet their geographical and financial position remains static. They run to stay in place. In the middle of the 20th century, specifically in the 60s, an investor named Warren faced this pressure head-on. The moment his assets began generating serious profit, the environment reacted instantly. His social circle started asking questions masked as concern. Why does he continue to drive an old car? Why doesn't he acquire real estate corresponding to his new status? Society demanded external confirmation of success. He was told it was time to start enjoying his money. Warren's answer exposed a fundamental error in the logic of the crowd. He stated that he was already enjoying it, enjoying the freedom of not needing all this junk. At that moment, a profound truth was laid bare. Having capital means having options, freedom, and peace, not the obligation to liquidate them through transactions. Consumerism is the direct inversion of this state. It is a voluntary prison, an architecture of anxiety, and a form of modern slavery. To understand how the trap snaps shut, it is necessary to disassemble the structure of the hunting grounds. Shopping malls and stores are not neutral territories. They are psychological weapons designed with a single purpose: resource extraction. An analysis of mall architecture reveals a strict protocol. There are no windows here to hide the changing time of day. There are no clocks. Artificial lighting is maintained at a level that stimulates wakefulness, but suppresses critical thinking. The floors are perfectly smooth, without thresholds, so as not to interrupt movement. The temperature and background music are calibrated to induce a state of mild trance in the subject. The task of the space is to destroy the sense of time, create an illusion of safety, and force the victim to lower their mental shield. The same methodology is used in casino design. A person enters, loses touch with reality, and exits to discover an absence of assets. However, physical walls are no longer needed. The shopping center has migrated into the device found in every person's pocket. Now the hunt is conducted through algorithms that know more about the user than the user knows about themselves. Artificial intelligence analyzes behavior patterns to offer exactly the stimulus that will work at the moment of maximum vulnerability. This is asymmetric warfare, a battle in which a lonely individual opposes billions of dollars invested in behavioral psychology, the world's best designers, and learning neural networks. In such a configuration, competition is impossible. The subject loses before the game begins, simply by accepting its rules. It is important to realize that the propensity to consume is not a personal vice or a moral defect. It is the result of systemic design. Programming begins in early childhood. Cartoons alternate with toy commercials. Movies sell a lifestyle. Social networks broadcast an endless showcase of success. The script is always identical. The character experiences negative emotions. They go shopping. The character celebrates a victory. they buy a new car. Success is visualized exclusively through the display of real estate, chronometers, and textiles. This is classical conditioning, described by Pavlov. Only instead of laboratory dogs, the object of training is the entire society. The chain, stimulus, reaction, reward, closes on biochemistry. Watching an ad births desire. Buying causes a dopamine release. This is a drug addiction mechanism in the literal sense. The brain gets used to chemical peaks and demands a new dose, a new acquisition, a new surge. Observation of thousands of people possessing high intelligence and decent education shows the same picture. They work 40, 50, 60 hours a week. But at the end of the month, their balance is zero. All resources flow into the accounts of credit organizations, go to pay for things the existence of which the owners often do not even remember. Such people are technically slaves, even if they do not realize their status. The math is merciless. If a person works all month and ends up with nothing left, they were not working for themselves. They were working for banks, for retail chains, for corporations. They are employees of these structures, deprived of a salary and labor rights. The cruelest part of this scheme is the instilled sense of helplessness. The victim is convinced that there is not enough money due to external factors, due to the high cost of living. In reality, the budget does not collapse from a single blow. It bleeds out through 1,000 small cuts. Impulsive purchases, forgotten subscriptions, insignificant installment plans. 10 payments of 90 units is not 90. It is 900. But the brain, poisoned by dopamine, refuses to process this arithmetic. The subject stands in the middle of a sales floor or scrolls through a marketplace feed, confident that they are making a decision. But their hand reaches for the pay button, not by their own will. A script triggers, written by marketers and embedded in the subcortex by decades of repetition. Free will at this moment is nothing more than a biochemical hallucination. The case history explaining the mechanics of endless consumption dates back to the 18th century. In 1769, the French philosopher Denis Diderot unintentionally discovered a fundamental law of economic psychology. Until the moment of infection, the subject lived a life in modest conditions, in harmony with his material environment. The balance was disturbed by the intrusion of an external object, a gift. It was a luxurious robe made of scarlet silk. The object seemed harmless, even a positive addition to assets. However, its appearance launched an irreversible process of re-evaluating reality. Diderot put on the robe, sat in his study, and discovered a critical system error. The new object did not integrate into the existing environment. On the contrary, it began to conflict with it. The silk looked too magnificent against the background of shabby furniture. The old chair, previously performing its function flawlessly, was suddenly classified by the brain as ugly and unworthy. It created visual dissonance, violating the aesthetic integrity dictated by the robe. The wooden table seemed too simple, rough, insulting the nobility of the fabric. The wardrobe looked pitiful. Instead of getting rid of the foreign body, the robe, the subject decided to pull reality up to the level of this object. This was a fatal error. A chain reaction of renewal began. First, the old chair was liquidated. A new armchair took its place. Then followed the table, followed by the wardrobe. The rug and curtains were also deemed non-compliant with the new standard, and replaced with expensive analogs. The virus captured space meter by meter, demanding total synchronization of the luxury level. The finale of this expansion was predictable. The philosopher ended up in a debt pit. A free gift cost him a state of total bankruptcy. This happened not due to functional necessity, but exclusively due to the emergence of a new baseline of expectations. The robe created a standard that the owner's entire life was now obliged to match. In psychology, this phenomenon has received the official name, the Diderot Effect. It is a mechanism where the introduction of a single item of higher status instantly devalues all other possessions of the subject, making them feel like a beggar in their own home. In the modern world, this effect is the engine of the entire retail economy. It is built into every product upgrade cycle. The scenario is always identical. A person acquires a flagship smartphone. Suddenly, their car begins to seem outdated, not corresponding to the technological level of the phone in their pocket. A car replacement occurs. The new car, gleaming in the garage, casts a shadow on the garage itself and the house to which it is attached. The dwelling begins to be perceived as cramped or insufficiently prestigious. A move to a more spacious house is made. But now the old furniture looks cheap in the new interiors with high ceilings. The cycle closes. New furniture, new clothes, new accessories are bought. It is an endless spiral. It is a trap with no constructive exit, as each new level of consumption merely sets a new bar for normality. The society around runs to the same rhythm, normalizing the pathology. It seems that this is the natural order of things, the only possible scenario of existence. However, an analysis of the actions of the ultra-wealthy, such as Warren, shows the presence of immunity to this virus. The investor continues to live in a house bought in 1958 for $31,000. For over 60 years, he has ignored signals to upgrade. When the discrepancy between his billionaire status and the modesty of his dwelling is pointed out to him, he asks the single rational question: why change something if the function is performed perfectly? For the majority of people deprived of this mental defense, reality becomes a battlefield. The truth is brutal. The more resources spent on attempting to impress external observers, the poorer the subject becomes, and the deeper they sink into unhappiness. Diderot's robe no longer hangs in the closet. It controls the entire life. It sits in the new chair, looks at the new curtains, and demands that its owner work even harder to pay for the scenery for the thing. The thing has acquired agency. The human has become service staff for their own property. In the world of predatory capital, there exists a counterintuitive axiom that violates the usual logic of social hierarchies. It states, external demonstration of resource scarcity is the highest form of protecting accumulated surplus. Simulating poverty is not a necessity, but a conscious strategic advantage. Society is used to reading signals linearly. Expensive objects on the subject's body are interpreted as proof of success. However, systemic analysis reveals an inverse correlation. The demonstration of status through the ownership of elite vehicles, Swiss-made chronometers, or living in gigantic mansions is a signal not of strength, but of vulnerability. When a subject broadcasts wealth, they become a beacon in a dark forest. This signal attracts a specific class of predators: scammers, robbers, exploiters, and carriers of social envy. One who looks rich is forced to invest colossal funds into a security perimeter. They live in a state of constant paranoia, hiring guards and installing surveillance systems. At the same time, the true owner of capital chooses a low-profile strategy. They pass through the crowd unnoticed. Their assets are securely hidden behind a facade of modesty. A person looking like the average everyman possesses absolute security. They do not need to protect what no one sees. This is the ironic paradox of the modern economy. To preserve wealth, it must be visually destroyed. The path to freedom paradoxically lies through the external semblance of poverty, while the path to economic prison is paved with attributes of luxury. Besides physical safety, the mimicry strategy performs the function of a high-precision social filter. The environment reacts to stimuli. If a subject moves in a sports car and wears the annual budget of a small country on their wrist, they attract people whose value orientations are tuned to the consumption of these objects. These people value not the personality of the owner, but their ability to provide access to resources. They love the Lamborghini, not the driver. Conversely, a modest lifestyle acts as a character test requiring no expenditure. When a person lives modestly, only those who value their essence, not their balance sheet, remain in their orbit. This is natural selection in a social circle. Friendship formed in conditions of a visible absence of excess possesses a durability margin for decades. An analysis of Warren's biography confirms the effectiveness of this method. His strongest social ties were formed during a period when the world did not yet know of his financial potential. People were drawn to his intellect and character, ignoring material status. At the same time, connections built on the foundation of money disintegrate the exact second funding ceases. This is the cruel truth. The more resources spent on attempting to impress strangers, the poorer the subject becomes and the more miserable their existence. Happiness and social stability do not correlate with the volume of consumption. They correlate with the quality of human connections, which cannot be bought, but are easily filtered by the absence of external shine. The truth that the system tries to hide lies in the fundamental difference between to be and to seem. Most participants in the economic race choose prison because it looks attractive. The cell lining is made of gold, and the handcuffs are encrusted with diamonds. Society glorifies this choice. Neighbors and colleagues admire the new car without asking the main question: what is the price of this metal in the equivalent of freedom? No one asks about the size of the debt or the owner's stress level. The outer shell takes precedence over inner reality. However, there exists an alternative branch of reality. In it, a person possesses nothing that would provoke the envy of the ignorant crowd. But they possess everything that matters: freedom of choice, the ability to say no, the right to live by their own script. The scene in a multi-billionaire's garage often shocks the unprepared observer. There might stand a car that hasn't been changed for decades. Warren, for example, drives a car bought at a price accessible to an average manager. Those around him ask, "Why don't you buy better?" The answer is always the same: improve what? If the mechanism works, delivers from point A to point B, and provides warmth, replacing it with a more expensive model is an act of irrational ego, not necessity. The real reason for fleet renewal for the majority is an attempt to fill an inner void with external gloss, a striving to gain status. But status is the currency of fools. In the world of real capital, conspicuous consumption is a sign of bad taste and a lack of financial intelligence. True power is quiet. Only weakness needs a loud exhaust and a bright logo on the hood. There is scientific proof that the pursuit of happiness through the acquisition of material goods is a mathematically unsolvable equation. In 1978, a group of researchers conducted a fundamental experiment, the results of which destroyed the main myth of consumerism. The objects of observation were lottery winners, people upon whom millions suddenly fell, completely changing their financial reality. The hypothesis of society states, such an influx of capital must raise the level of happiness to an exorbitant height and fix it there forever. However, the data showed the opposite. Just a few months later, the level of subjective well-being of these lucky ones returned to the same indicators as before the win. Money did not bring happiness. It merely rotated the problems. Previously, the subject worried about how to pay electricity bills. Now they worried about how to manage capital, how to avoid taxes, and how to determine who around them is a friend and who is a parasite. This phenomenon is known in neurobiology and psychology as hedonic adaptation, or the hedonic treadmill. The mechanism works ruthlessly. A person raises the level of consumption, experiences a surge of positive emotions for several days, and then their neurochemistry returns to the baseline level. The norm shifts. What caused delight yesterday becomes background noise today and a necessary minimum tomorrow. Consumption acts on the brain identically to narcotic substances. This is not a metaphor. It is a biochemical fact. The process of buying triggers a release of dopamine, the neurotransmitter of anticipation and reward. However, brain receptors possess the property of tolerance. To obtain the same level of stimulation next time, the dose must be increased. This explains why buying the first used car brings more emotion than buying a third luxury SUV. Sensitivity is dulled, dependence arises. The subject begins to consume not for pleasure, but to relieve withdrawal symptoms, boredom, anxiety, existential emptiness. Shopping becomes therapy, but false therapy. A person feels bad, performs a transaction, feels short-term relief, and a few hours later, the emptiness returns, often amplified by guilt for the spent funds. This is a destructive cycle. The attempt to fill an internal vacuum with external objects is doomed to failure because these objects do not possess semantic density. They are empty. The solution lies not in the plane of having, but in the plane of being. Warren spends days reading. Books cost pennies, but yield infinite intellectual returns. This pleasure is not subject to inflation and does not cause addiction requiring raised stakes, meaning goals, relationships. These categories fill the void, making consumption unnecessary. The system sells an ideal, a successful person in an expensive suit getting out of an elite car. But it hides the fine print in the contract. Consumerism does not walk alone. It brings with it an entourage, anxiety, depression, insomnia, and physical pathologies. When identity is built on the foundation of "I am what I own," a person can never be whole. There will always be someone with a longer yacht and a taller house. This is a competition without a finish line, a race in which it is impossible to win, but possible to die from exhaustion. Observation of top managers and owners of large fortunes caught in this trap reveals a terrifying picture. They have mansions, a fleet of cars, couture clothes. But inside these decorations live people taking antidepressants, suffering from stomach ulcers, and unable to relax without chemical assistance. They sold their soul to the system in exchange for the promise of happiness. But the system violated the terms of the deal. It promised status, but gave insecurity. It promised fulfillment, but gave a vacuum. This is a fraudulent scheme of global scale. Everyone signs this contract because social pressure is unbearable, and the alternative requires courage. And so, in a golden cage, surrounded by things he hates, the subject realizes he is lost. He reached the top, but the ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. In financial physics, there is a law ignored by 99% of the population. The size of income does not matter. What matters exclusively is the capital retention rate and the burn rate. This is a mathematical inevitability that divides humanity into two biological species, masters and slaves. To prove this, it is necessary to consider two parallel scenarios. Two subjects, identical starting point, identical resource flow, but diametrically opposite data processing algorithms. Subject A, let's call him Tom. His income is 20,000 units per month. This is a solid flow, allowing one to build an empire. But Tom's operating system is infected with the status virus. He is obliged to demonstrate success. Therefore, he acquires a car worth 150,000. The deal is structured on credit for 60 months. The monthly payment, insurance, and fuel remove 5,500 units from his budget. Next follows the rent of an apartment in a prestigious district for 4,000. Textiles from luxury brands burn another 2,000. Gastronomic experiments in restaurants, 1,500. The math is ruthless. 13,000 in mandatory expenses. The remaining 7,000 dissolves in household friction, petty spending, and entertainment. The month's total is absolute zero. Tom works for 5 years, passing millions through himself, but his net worth remains zero. He is a high-paid conduit of money from the employer to the banks. Subject B, let's call him Juan. The same incoming flow, 20,000, but his mental firmware is different. Juan understands that a car is a utilitarian tool, not an extension of the ego. He buys transport for 30,000, paying the full amount at once. His monthly car maintenance costs are only 700 units. Housing is chosen on the principle of sufficiency, 1,500. Clothes are updated as they wear out, 300 units. Meals are predominantly homemade. Juan's total expenses are fixed at the level of 2,700 units. The difference is colossal. Juan has 17,300 units of free liquidity remaining. 10,000 of this amount is directed monthly, without exception, into investment instruments. This is not magic. This is discipline. After 5 years, the magic of compound interest kicks in. While Tom runs in place, Juan's capital reaches the mark of 700,000. This is no longer just money. It is a clod of time. It is accumulated freedom. Juan bought himself the right not to depend on external circumstances. The system tests everyone for strength. A crisis is inevitable. One day, the corporation announces a staff reduction. Both subjects receive a termination notice. At this moment, two parallel lines of destiny diverge into infinity. For Tom, this is a catastrophe. He has no reserves. He has only liabilities requiring servicing. Creditors do not wait. To survive, he is forced to sell his luxury car. But the market is cruel. the used asset loses half its value. He is left with debt, without a car, and without housing. At 35, he is forced to return to his parents' home, completely crushed by the system. His rich life turned out to be a hallucination. For Juan, firing is just a free Tuesday. He has $700,000 in his accounts. He has no debts. He does not panic. He does not grab the first offer that comes along. He calmly analyzes the market, chooses options, or decides to take a pause for a year entirely. The same termination order. For one, it is a death sentence to social status. For the other, merely an administrative procedure. The difference is not in the amount earned, but in the mathematics of spending. The 4% rule states, if capital allows covering expenses by withdrawing only 4% per year, the subject achieves financial immortality. Juan approached this point in 5 years. Tom moved away from it forever. The abyss between them is not bad luck. It is a choice between looking rich and being free. In game theory, there is a concept called Zugzwang, a position in which any move by the player leads to a worsening of their position. The consumption system is designed exactly like this. If a subject buys, they lose resources. If they desire to buy but cannot, they lose mental energy. The only winning strategy in such a configuration is refusing the game itself. Freedom requires a radical shift in definitions. It is not the ability to buy everything in the shop window. It is the ability to walk past the window without experiencing the slightest flicker of neurons. It is a state where the absence of the desire to possess becomes a source of strength, not a deficit. Freedom is autonomy from external stimuli. To achieve this state, the activation of a strict detoxification protocol is required. The first step is the total elimination of the incoming signal. It is impossible to resist what is in the field of view 24 hours a day. Therefore, the subject is obliged to cut the cables. Television, social networks, influencers. All these channels broadcast the same code. Buy. If a person follows a technology channel, they will inevitably want a new gadget. This is not a question of willpower. It is a question of statistics. Unsubscribing, deleting apps, digital silence. This is not asceticism. This is sanitary processing of consciousness. Information that is truly necessary for survival and development will find a way to the recipient. Everything else is manipulative noise. The second stage of the protocol is the physical removal of noise. The surrounding space shapes thinking. A house packed with things creates a mental traffic jam. The 6-month rule applies. If an object has not been used within this period, it is classified as trash. It must be removed without sentiment, without excuses, like what if it comes in handy. Everything a person owns demands a particle of their attention. Removing 90% of junk frees up a colossal volume of the brain's RAM. The wardrobe paradox. Having 100 clothing options, the subject experiences analysis, paralysis, and stress. Having 10 high-quality sets, they gain clarity and speed of decision-making. The third stage. Installation of a time airlock. The impulse to buy does not last long. It is a chemical flash. The 30-day rule acts as a fire extinguisher. The desire is recorded in a list, but action is postponed for a month. Statistics show that 90% of items on this list lose relevance by the end of the term. The dopamine fog clears, and the subject sees the uselessness of the object. Those units that pass the filter are bought consciously. This saves thousands of currency units annually, simply due to the pause between stimulus and response. The hardest part of the transformation is replacing the source of pleasure. The brain demands a reward. The system trained it to receive a reward through spending. The sovereignty protocol requires inversion, deriving pleasure from preservation and multiplication. Investing must become the new consumption. Watching capital grow, watching compound interest start working instead of the human, evokes a deeper and more stable hormonal response than unpacking yet another box. It is a sense of safety, a sense of control, a sense of victory over chaos. The subject begins to value quality over quantity. One pair of shoes that lasts 10 years is mathematically and psychologically more profitable than 10 pairs falling apart after a season. This reduces the number of decisions, reduces the level of entropy in life. Money ceases to be a means of therapy for boredom. It returns to its original function, a tool for exchanging and accumulating energy. And here, social resistance kicks in. The environment remaining in the consumption matrix will begin to react aggressively. Mockery of the old car or simple clothes is inevitable, but this mockery is an indicator of the right path. People attack what threatens their worldview. The sight of a free person is torturous for a slave shackled in golden chains of credit. Their laughter is a defensive reaction of the psyche, trying to justify its own financial suicide. Ultimately, life boils down to a binary choice. Ahead are two versions of the future. Version A, 65 years old. The subject is surrounded by artifacts of past success, a decaying house, out-of-fashion clothes, old gadgets. But his accounts are empty. He is forced to continue working or depend on a state handout. He looks back with regret, realizing that he exchanged his life for a set of plastic and fabrics. He was the perfect consumer, and the system squeezed him dry. Version B, 65 years old. The subject owns little in the physical sense, but he owns all his time. His capital generates a flow covering any needs. He can travel, create, contemplate. He looks back with gratitude to that young self who found the strength to say no. He won because he exited the game in time. The choice between these versions is not made in old age. It is made today, right now, at the moment of the next transaction. Each purchase is a vote for one of these scenarios. The camera focuses on the final image. An old man sitting in an armchair. He is 99 years old. There are no superfluous objects in the room, no noise, only silence and light. He does not wear a Rolex. He doesn't need to know the time, because all the time in the world belongs to him. This is the highest form of wealth. Freedom is the only luxury worth buying. Everything else is a cheap fake. Protocol complete. The choice is up to the observer.